My daughter-in-law handed me that bottle of Cabernet like she was presenting the crown jewels, and I should have known right then that something was off. The very next day, she called asking how the wine was, and when I told her I'd given it to her mother, the silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. My name is Eleanor Williams, but everyone calls me Ellie. I'm 67, a widow of 3 years, and I've always prided myself on reading people. Apparently, I'd been reading my daughter-in-law Sophie wrong for 5 years. It started March 15th, my birthday. Sophie had been unusually attentive that week, calling twice, asking what I wanted. Nothing fancy, I'd said, just having family together. But Sophie insisted on bringing something special. She arrived at my ranch house with a perfectly wrapped wine bottle and a smile too bright. "Happy birthday, Ellie," she chirped. "I picked this out especially for you." The bottle was beautiful. Deep red wax seal, elegant label, probably cost more than my weekly groceries. "Sophie, this is too much," I said. "Nothing's too much for my favorite mother-in-law," she replied. My son Michael appeared from the kitchen. "What's too much?" he asked. "Your wife bought me wine that cost more than my car payment." Michael laughed. "Mom, you paid off that car 3 years ago." The evening passed pleasantly. Dinner, Michael's stories, Sophie seeming relaxed. But she kept glancing at the wine bottle on my counter. Every time I offered to open it, she quickly suggested saving it. "It's too good to rush," she said. "You should savor it when you can really appreciate it." That should have been my first clue. After they left, I stared at that bottle. Something about Sophie's insistence bothered me. I'd always found my daughter-in-law calculating. Everything she did served some purpose. The next morning, I thought about Helen Carter, Sophie's mother. We'd maintained a warm friendship despite our children's rocky marriage. Helen had mentioned feeling down about her divorce. A nice wine might help. I called Helen around noon. "I have a birthday gift to share." "Sophie brought gorgeous wine, but you know me and alcohol. Thought you might appreciate it more." "Oh, Ellie, that's thoughtful," Helen said, brightening. "I'd love that." When Helen arrived, I handed her the bottle and watched her face light up. "This is beautiful wine. Sophie has excellent taste." After Helen left, I puttered around, unable to shake the feeling I'd made a mistake. But what kind of mistake could giving away wine be? The phone rang at 6:30. Sophie's name on caller ID. "Hello, sweetheart." "Hi, Ellie." Something strained in her tone. "Just checking on you. How are you feeling?" "Wonderful. Thank you. Yesterday was lovely." "Good." A pause. "So, how was the wine?" I blinked, surprised. "The wine? Oh, I haven't opened it." Another pause, longer. "You haven't opened it?" "No, honey. Actually, I gave it to your mother. You know how I am with alcohol, and Helen's been so down with the divorce." The silence was so complete, I checked my phone. "Sophie? Are you there? You gave it to my mother?" Her voice had changed completely, higher pitched, almost panicked. "Yes, is that a problem?" "You did what?" The words exploded out, so loud I held the phone away. In 5 years, I'd never heard Sophie raise her voice. She was always controlled, composed. "Sophie, what's wrong? It's just wine." "It's not just—" She stopped abruptly, heavy breathing. "When did you give it to her?" "This afternoon." She was so pleased. "Why are you upset?" "I'm not upset," she said quickly, voice shaking. "I just wanted you to enjoy it specifically." "That's sweet, but Helen will appreciate it. She said she was opening it tonight." The sound through the phone was between a gasp and sob. Then the line went dead. Something was very wrong with that wine. I tried calling Sophie back immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. Then Michael, but his phone was off too. That's when real panic set in. I'd developed good instincts about genuine trouble versus paranoia after raising a child alone. Those instincts were screaming now. I sat in my kitchen, replaying Sophie's visit, how she'd insisted I save the wine, the glances at it, questions about how I felt, today's immediate call asking about the wine. The terrible possibility lurking in my mind crawled forward. What if something was wrong with that wine? Something that wasn't supposed to be there. I grabbed my keys and headed for Helen's house, heart pounding. Helen lived 20 minutes away in a small apartment complex. I'd never driven so carefully and frantically simultaneously. When I knocked, Helen answered with a smile and flushed cheeks. Ellie, what a surprise. I was just having a glass of that wonderful wine. Relief flooded through me. She was fine, standing, talking, smiling. How are you feeling? I asked, studying her face. Much better than I have in weeks, she said, gesturing me in. I don't know what was in that wine, but it's like magic. I feel so relaxed. Those words sent chills down my spine. What do you mean, what was in that wine? Helen laughed, a sound slightly off. Some wines just make you feel different. This one makes me feel floaty, like worries have melted away. I followed her to the living room. The wine bottle sat on her coffee table, about a third empty. Helen moved with slight unsteadiness. Helen, how much have you had? Just 2 glasses, she said, settling on her couch with a dreamy expression. But I feel like I've had a whole bottle. Strangest thing. My mouth went dry. Strange how? Well, I opened it around 5, had my first glass with dinner. Tasted bitter, but expensive wine sometimes does. Then another glass an hour ago, and that's when everything started feeling soft. I sat across from her, keeping my voice calm. When you say soft, what exactly do you mean? She waved vaguely. Like I'm floating, like everything's far away. I was feeling so sad about Richard, the divorce, starting over at 64. But now I don't care. This wasn't normal wine behavior. While wine could relax you, it didn't make you feel floating after 2 glasses. Helen, listen carefully. How are you feeling physically? Nausea, dizziness, vision problems? She considered with slow deliberation of someone whose thinking was compromised. A little dizzy, and my mouth feels funny, dry but also tingly. I was pulling out my phone before processing her words. We're going to the hospital. Hospital? Helen looked confused. Why? I feel fine. Better than fine. That's exactly why we're going. The emergency room doctor was a tired-looking woman about my son's age who listened with professional skepticism. So you think someone tampered with wine? Dr. Martinez asked, reviewing Helen's vitals. I know how it sounds. But my daughter-in-law's reaction when I said I'd given the wine away was extreme. Helen, now pale and confused on the examination table, spoke up. I do feel strange. Not sick exactly, but not right. Dr. Martinez nodded. We'll run tests. Blood work, urine analysis. If something's in her system that shouldn't be, we'll find it. While waiting, I tried calling Michael. This time he answered. Mom, Sophie said you called, but she couldn't reach you back. Michael, listen carefully. Where is Sophie right now? She's in the bathroom. Why? What's wrong? I gave that wine to Helen, and now Helen's in the emergency room. Silence. This was shock, not guilt. What happened? Is Helen okay? I don't know yet. But Michael, Sophie's reaction when I told her about the wine was like I'd said someone was about to drink poison. Mom, that's a serious accusation. I know, but ask yourself, what innocent reason could Sophie have for reacting that way? Let me talk to her and call you back. 2 hours later, Dr. Martinez returned with results confirming my worst fears. Your friend has rohypnol in her system, she said quietly. Date rape drug, but used for other purposes. Causes memory loss, disorientation, and in higher doses can be fatal. The room spun. How much did she have? Not life-threatening, thankfully, but enough for significant impairment. If she'd consumed the entire bottle, Dr. Martinez shook her head. Bringing her in was the right call. Helen, more alert thanks to IV fluids, looked at me with frightened eyes. Someone tried to drug me? Not you, I said softly. Horrible truth settling over me. Me. The drive home from the hospital at 2 a.m. was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Helen was staying overnight for observation. The rohypnol was leaving her system, but the knowledge of what could have happened wasn't leaving mine. Someone had tried to drug me. My daughter-in-law, the woman who'd married my son, sat at my dinner table, called me Mom for 5 years. But why? I didn't really know Sophie at all. I knew the version she presented to family, but what did I actually know about who she was when we weren't around? My house felt different when I walked through the front door. I found myself checking locks twice and pulling all curtains shut. If Sophie was capable of drugging wine meant for me, what else might she be capable of? I was exhausted, but too wired to sleep, so I made tea and sat at my kitchen table. That's when I noticed my purse on the counter, slightly open. I always closed my purse completely. Always. But now the zipper was open about 2 inches, my wallet visible inside. My hands shook as I checked contents. Everything seemed there. But something felt off. I counted bills. $63. I specifically remembered having 80 when I'd left for Helen's. $17 was missing. Someone had been in my house, gone through my purse, taken money. The only person with a key besides me was Michael and Sophie. I checked every room, looking for other disturbances. In my bedroom, I found them. My jewelry box had been moved slightly. The little drawer where I kept valuable pieces was open just a crack. My grandmother's wedding ring was missing. The only thing of real value I owned besides my house. I sank onto my bed, the full scope hitting me. Sophie hadn't just tried to drug me. She'd come into my house while I was at the hospital and stolen from me. Unless this wasn't the first time. I spent the next 3 hours going through everything I owned. What I found made my blood run cold. Over the past 6 months, things had been disappearing. A silver picture frame, some antique spoons, a $50 savings bond from my desk drawer. I'd been attributing these disappearances to aging memory. But now I realized the truth. Sophie had been systematically stealing from me for months. The phone rang at 7 a.m., Michael's name on caller ID. "Mom, I've been up all night thinking about what you said." "And?" "Sophie's been acting strange lately, secretive, going out more, staying out later. When I ask where she's been, she gets defensive." "Michael, there's something else I need to tell you." I told him about the missing money, jewelry, other items that had disappeared. With each revelation, the silence on his end grew heavier. "I can't believe this," he finally said. "I can't believe Sophie would—" "But the wine thing, Mom, that's attempted poisoning. We have to call the police." "I know we do, but first I need to understand why. What possible reason could Sophie have for wanting to drug me?" "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." An hour later, Michael was at my door. He looked like he hadn't slept, hair disheveled, eyes red-rimmed. Behind him stood Sophie, and the sight of her made my stomach clench. She looked perfectly composed, as always. Hair neat, makeup flawless, crisp white blouse. But something was different about her eyes, a hardness I'd never noticed before. "Hello, Ellie," she said, voice calm. "Michael says there's been some kind of misunderstanding about the wine." "Misunderstanding," I repeated slowly. "Is that what we're calling attempted drugging now?" Sophie's composure slipped for just a moment, something ugly crossing her face before she smoothed it away. "I think there's been a mistake. Maybe the wine was contaminated somehow." "Sophie." My voice was quiet but firm. "They found rohypnol in Helen's blood. That doesn't happen by accident." She stared at me for a long moment, calculating her options. Then, to my surprise, she smiled. "You're absolutely right," she said. "It doesn't happen by accident." Michael's head snapped toward his wife. "Sophie, what are you saying?" "I'm saying your mother is smarter than I gave her credit for." Sophie settled into my armchair like she owned it, though not quite smart enough to drink the wine herself. The casual way she said it sent ice through my veins. "Why?" I asked. "Why would you want to drug me?" Sophie tilted her head, studying me like an interesting specimen. "Do you really want to know, Ellie? Because once I tell you, there's no going back to pretending we're one big happy family." I looked at my son, who was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. "Yes," I said. "I want to know." Sophie reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder, setting it on my coffee table with the same care she'd used when presenting the wine bottle. "This is why," she said simply. I opened the folder and found photocopies of legal documents, insurance papers, bank statements, and at the top, a life insurance policy with my name on it. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "From your desk drawer. Same place you keep your savings bonds. Used to keep them anyway." Michael leaned over my shoulder. "I don't understand. What does Mom's life insurance have to do with anything?" Sophie smiled at him like he was a slow child. "Your mother made you the beneficiary of her life insurance policy, Michael. $500,000. I blinked. "It's not 500,000. It's 50,000. "Not anymore." Sophie pulled out another document. "6 months ago, you increased your coverage. Don't you remember? I helped you with the paperwork." The memory came flooding back. Sophie had helped me with insurance paperwork, telling me there were updates I needed to sign. I'd trusted her completely, signing where she told me without reading the fine print. You forged my signature, I said slowly. I witnessed your signature, Sophie corrected, on a policy increase that you requested. There's a recording of the phone call to the insurance company. My blood went cold. You called them pretending to be me. I called them as you. We sound very similar on the phone. Sophie's smile was sharp now. The increase was approved. Premiums are automatically deducted from your checking account. Everything is perfectly legal. Michael was staring at documents like they might bite him. Sophie, you increased my mother's life insurance without her knowledge? I increased it with her knowledge. She just didn't understand what she was agreeing to. But that's not the best part. She pulled out one more document, and this one made my heart stop. You also signed a new will, Sophie said. A very simple will that leaves everything to Michael, including the house, your savings, and of course, the insurance money. I never signed a new will. You signed a document updating your beneficiary information. The will was just attached to the back. You didn't read it all the way through. I remembered that day now. Sophie had brought over what she said were routine financial updates. I'd been distracted, rushing to get ready for a doctor's appointment. I'd signed where she told me to sign, trusting my daughter-in-law. But that still doesn't explain the Rohypnol, Michael said, his voice hollow. Sophie turned to him with genuine affection, which somehow made everything worse. Oh, honey, you're really not seeing the big picture here. Then explain it to me. Your mother has $500,000 in life insurance. She has this house, worth at least $200,000. She has savings, bonds, a small pension. All told, we're looking at probably $750,000. The room was silent, except for my old clock ticking. We're drowning in debt, Michael. Your business expansion, the new house, my credit cards. We owe almost $300,000, and the payments are killing us. So you decided to kill me instead, I said quietly. Sophie shook her head. Nothing so dramatic. The Rohypnol was just supposed to make you confused, disoriented. Maybe you'd fall down the stairs. Maybe you'd wander outside in your nightgown and catch pneumonia. Maybe you'd have what looked like a stroke. You wanted it to look like an accident. I wanted it to be over quickly. For all of us. Sophie's voice was gentle, almost loving. You're 67 years old, Ellie. You live alone. You have no real purpose anymore. You're just existing rather than living. This way, you'd go peacefully, and Michael and I could finally build the life we've been working toward. Michael stood up so abruptly his chair fell over. Are you insane? You're talking about murdering my mother. I'm talking about solving all of our problems with one simple solution. She's my mother. Sophie's mask slipped again, revealing something cold underneath. She's an obstacle, Michael, and obstacles get removed. That's when I understood something crucial about my daughter-in-law. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't acting out of passion or desperation. She was a predator who had been planning this methodically, patiently, for months. The small thefts, I said. Those were test runs. Sophie nodded approvingly. Very good. I needed to see how observant you were, how quickly you'd notice things going missing. You failed that test spectacularly. And if I'd drunk the wine last night, you'd have felt relaxed at first, then confused. You might have called Michael to say you weren't feeling well. By the time anyone thought to check on you, you'd have been unconscious, maybe dead if you'd finished the bottle. Michael was pacing now, running hands through his hair. This is insane. Sophie, this is my mother we're talking about. I love her. I know you do. But love doesn't pay our mortgage, honey. Love doesn't get creditors off our backs. Love doesn't buy us the life we deserve. I looked at this woman who'd sat at my dinner table, who'd helped me with crossword puzzles, who'd called me Mom for 5 years, and realized I was looking at a complete stranger. What made you think I wouldn't fight back? I asked. Sophie blinked, clearly not having considered this possibility. Fight back how? You're a 67-year-old widow with no money and no power. What could you possibly do to me? I smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a spark of my old self returning. Let's find out. The silence that followed stretched so long I could hear the refrigerator humming. Sophie was studying my face, trying to determine if I was bluffing. Michael had stopped pacing and was staring at both of us. Let's be practical, Ellie, Sophie said finally, patronizing tone I'd learned to recognize. What exactly do you think you can do? Call the police? Tell them what? That you gave away a bottle of wine and your friend got sick? I could tell them about the Rohypnol, which could have come from anywhere. Helen's been depressed about her divorce. Maybe she's been taking sleeping pills and forgot. Maybe she mixed alcohol with medication. These things happen with older people. The casual cruelty hit me like a slap. Sophie was talking about how easy it would be to dismiss anything I said as confused rambling of an elderly woman. I could tell them about the forged insurance documents. Sophie shook her head. Nothing was forged. You signed everything. There are witnesses, recordings, a paper trail showing you requested all these changes. I was very thorough. Michael finally found his voice. Sophie, stop. Just stop talking. He turned to me, his face pale. Mom, we're calling the police right now. No, I said quietly. We're not. Both of them stared at me. Not yet, I continued. Sophie's right about one thing. I don't have enough evidence to prove what she intended to do. Sophie's smile returned. Finally, some sense. But here's what you've forgotten, sweetheart, I said, standing up and walking to my kitchen. I've been managing my own affairs for 3 years since my husband died. That means I've learned a few things about protecting myself. I opened my junk drawer and pulled out a small digital recording device. This entire conversation has been recorded. I held up the device, watching Sophie's face drain of all color. Including your confession to increasing my life insurance without my knowledge, forging my will, stealing from me for months, and attempting to drug me with the intention of causing my death. You can't use that. It's illegal to record someone without their consent. Actually, in this state, only one party needs to consent to the recording. That would be me. I'd looked up the recording laws after my husband died, and this recording was made in my own home, where I have every right to record conversations. Michael was staring at the device like it was a miracle. Mom, how did you... I turned it on when I saw Sophie reach for that folder. Call it intuition. I looked directly at Sophie. Or call it the wisdom that comes from living 67 years and learning to recognize a snake when I see one. Sophie's composure was cracking now. Ellie, you don't understand the pressure we've been under. The debt, the stress. I understand that you decided my life was worth less than your credit card bills. That's not... I never meant for it to go this far. It started small, just borrowing a few dollars here and there, taking things I thought you wouldn't miss. But then the debt kept growing, and I just saw an opportunity to solve everything at once. By killing me, by helping you transition peacefully. You've been so lonely since your husband died. You've said yourself that you feel like you're just going through the motions. I stared at her, amazed by her ability to reframe attempted murder as mercy. And you decided to help me transition while coincidentally solving all your financial problems. The money was never the point. The money was just a bonus. Even Michael wasn't buying that. Sophie, stop. Please just stop talking. But Sophie was in full damage control mode now. Michael, you have to understand. I did this for us, for our future. Your mother is old. She's alone. She's not really living anyway. We could have used that money to build something beautiful together. She's my mother, Michael said, his voice broken. And I'm your wife. I'm the mother of your future children. I'm the person you're supposed to spend the rest of your life with. Doesn't that count for something? I watched my son struggle with this impossible choice. Sophie was right about one thing. He did love her. Even now, there was part of him that wanted to find a way to make this work. Michael, I said gently, you know what has to happen now. He nodded slowly. I know. Sophie must have seen something change in his expression because she suddenly stood up, grabbing her purse. I think I should go. We can talk about this later when everyone's had time to process. No, Michael said firmly. You're not going anywhere. Michael, you can't seriously be thinking of choosing her over me. I'm thinking of choosing right over wrong. And what you did, what you plan to do, is wrong. It's evil. Sophie's face hardened. Fine. But before you make any permanent decisions, you might want to think about what calling the police will mean for your precious mother. What do you mean? I mean Ellie isn't as innocent in all this as she's pretending to be. My stomach dropped. What are you talking about? Sophie's smile was back, sharp and vicious. Tell him about the prescription pills, Ellie. Tell him about the ones you've been saving up. Michael turned to me, confusion clear on his face. What prescription pills? After my husband died, I'd gone through deep depression. My doctor had prescribed sleeping pills and anxiety medication. When I'd started feeling better, I'd stopped taking them regularly, but I'd kept the leftover pills, just in case. It's not what she's implying, I said quickly. Isn't it? Sophie's voice was silky now. Tell him how many sleeping pills you have hoarded in your medicine cabinet. Tell him about the night last month when you told me you sometimes thought about taking them all at once. That was a moment of weakness. I would never what? Kill yourself? But you'd already been thinking about it, hadn't you? The Rohypnol would have just helped you along with something you were already considering. Sophie had taken my darkest moment and turned it into justification for her actions. You're sick, Michael said to Sophie, but I could see doubt creeping into his eyes. I'm practical, Sophie replied, and now we all know where we stand. I looked at this woman who'd eaten at my table, who'd helped me hang Christmas decorations, and realized she'd never seen me as a person at all. I was just a problem to be solved. There's something else you should know, I said to Michael. About the timing. Sophie's head snapped toward me, wariness replacing her confidence. 2 weeks ago, I mentioned to Helen that I was thinking about updating my will. I never mentioned this to you. Sophie. But someone called my lawyer's office last week asking about my will status. Someone pretending to be me. That's not... Sophie started. The lawyer's secretary recognized it wasn't my voice. She called me to confirm. I smiled grimly. Looks like you got nervous that I might change my will before you could implement your plan. Michael was looking at Sophie like he'd never seen her before. You've been monitoring Mom's legal affairs? I've been protecting our interests, Sophie snapped, composure finally cracking completely. You're too soft, Michael. Too sentimental. I walked to my kitchen counter and picked up my landline phone. What are you doing? Sophie asked. I'm calling the police. I dialed 911 and waited for the dispatcher. 911. What's your emergency? I need to report an attempted murder and grand theft, I said clearly, looking directly at Sophie. My daughter-in-law has been stealing from me for months and tried to kill me last night by putting Rohypnol in a bottle of wine. Sophie lunged toward me, trying to grab the phone, but Michael caught her arm. Ma'am, are you in immediate danger? The dispatcher asked. Yes, I said, watching Sophie struggle against Michael's grip. The person who tried to kill me is in my house right now. Units are on their way. Stay on the line with me. Sophie stopped struggling and looked at me with pure hatred. You have no idea what you've just done. I've just saved my own life, I replied. Through the window, I could see the flashing lights of police cars pulling into my driveway. The police are going to find your fingerprints on that wine bottle. They're going to trace the Rohypnol. They're going to examine every document you forged. And then they're going to put you in prison for a very long time. The police were knocking on my door now. And me? The old lady you thought would be so easy to kill? I'm going to live for a very long time. Long enough to make sure you never get out of prison. I opened the door and let justice walk in. The next few hours were a blur of police officers, evidence collection, and statements. Detective Sarah Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, took my recorded confession and the recording device like they were precious artifacts. Mrs. Williams, this recording is incredibly valuable evidence, she said, securing it in an evidence bag. Combined with the Rohypnol in Mrs. Carter's system and the forged documents, we have a solid case. Sophie sat in my living room, handcuffed and silent, her perfect composure finally shattered. The woman who'd tried to kill me for money now looked exactly like what she was, a common criminal who'd gotten caught. The fingerprint analysis will take a few days, Detective Morrison continued, but I'm confident we'll find Sophie's prints on that wine bottle. She wasn't wearing gloves when she handled it, was she? I shook my head. She presented it to me like a gift, made a whole show of it. Michael sat across the room, looking like his world had collapsed, which I supposed it had. The woman he'd loved and trusted had turned out to be a calculating murderer who'd married him for money. Mom, he said quietly, I'm so sorry. I should have seen the signs. I should have protected you. Honey, she fooled me too, and I've been around a lot longer than you have. Sophie finally spoke, her voice bitter. Don't act like the victim here, Ellie. You've been nothing but a burden to Michael for years. At least I was trying to solve the problem. Detective Morrison raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, I'd advise you to stop talking without an attorney present. Why? What's the worst that could happen? I'm already going to prison for attempted murder. Sophie laughed, a harsh sound. Might as well tell everyone exactly what I think of this whole charade. That's when I realized Sophie wasn't just evil. She was stupid. Smart enough to plan a murder, too stupid to know when to keep her mouth shut. You know what the funny thing is? Sophie continued, ignoring Detective Morrison's warning look. I almost succeeded. If you hadn't given that wine to Helen, you'd be dead right now, and Michael and I would be planning your funeral while calculating how much money we'd inherit. Michael made a sound like he'd been punched. Sophie, stop. Please. Why should I stop? It's the truth. Your precious mother has been living on borrowed time anyway. I just tried to speed up the process. Detective Morrison was taking notes rapidly. Every word Sophie said was digging her grave deeper. Ma'am, you're confessing to premeditated murder. Are you sure you don't want to wait for a lawyer? Sophie shrugged. What's the point? Ellie has that recording. You have the evidence. I'm not stupid enough to think I can get out of this. Actually, I thought, you're exactly that stupid. But I kept my mouth shut and let her keep talking. The only thing I regret, Sophie said, looking directly at me, is that you're still alive. And that was the moment I knew Sophie had just guaranteed herself a life sentence. 3 months later, I sat in a courtroom watching Sophie's trial unfold with the satisfaction of someone who'd finally seen justice served. The prosecutor, a brilliant woman named Amanda Chen, had built an airtight case using my recording, the Rohypnol evidence, and Sophie's own confession. But the real shock came when Detective Morrison took the stand to present additional evidence they'd discovered during their investigation. We found that Mrs. Sophie Williams had been researching Rohypnol for over 6 months, Detective Morrison testified. Her browser history showed searches for how much Rohypnol is fatal, Rohypnol detection time, and how to make death look accidental. The jury looked horrified. Sophie sat at the defendant's table, finally looking appropriately terrified. We also discovered that this wasn't her first attempt, Detective Morrison continued. 2 months before the wine incident, Mrs. Williams purchased a bottle of prescription sleep aids using a fake name. The pharmacy's security cameras showed her buying them with cash. My blood ran cold. What were those pills for? We believed she was planning to crush them into your food or drink, but decided the Rohypnol would be more reliable. So Sophie had been planning to kill me for months, not just weeks. The woman had been sitting at my dinner table, helping me with grocery shopping, all while plotting my murder. Amanda Chen approached the witness stand. Detective Morrison, did your investigation reveal any other victims? Yes. We discovered that Mrs. Williams had been systematically stealing from elderly clients at the insurance agency where she worked part-time. Over the past 2 years, she'd stolen approximately $50,000 from various clients. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. I'd had no idea Sophie even had a job, let alone one that gave her access to other people's money. We also found evidence that she'd been forging documents for other family members. Her own mother's will had been altered to leave everything to Sophie instead of Sophie's brother. I looked over at Helen, who was sitting in the gallery. Her face was white with shock. Sophie hadn't just tried to kill me. She'd been stealing from her own mother. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the witness stand with my head held high. Sophie's defense attorney, a tired-looking public defender, tried to paint me as a confused elderly woman who'd misunderstood Sophie's intentions. Mrs. Williams, isn't it true that you've been suffering from depression since your husband died? Yes, it is. And isn't it true that you've contemplated suicide? I looked directly at the jury. I had a few dark moments after my husband died, but contemplating and planning are 2 very different things. I never tried to actually hurt myself. Your client, on the other hand, spent months planning to murder me for money. But you did have a large quantity of sleeping pills in your possession? I had leftover medication from a difficult time in my life. I kept them because throwing away prescription drugs seemed wasteful. But I never used them to hurt anyone. Unlike your client who put Rohypnol in wine, meant for me. The defense attorney looked frustrated. Mrs. Williams, isn't it possible that my client was simply trying to help you find peace? I smiled. If your client wanted to help me find peace, she could have suggested therapy, or grief counseling, or any number of helpful resources. She didn't need to drug my wine and forge my will to steal my money. That's not helping someone find peace. That's murder for profit. The courtroom was completely silent. And for the record, I continued, I found plenty of peace now that your client is behind bars, where she belongs. The day of Sophie's sentencing, the courtroom was packed. Helen sat beside me, having recovered from her own shock at discovering her daughter's true nature. Michael sat on the other side, looking older than his 35 years. Judge Patricia Hawkins was a stern woman in her 60s who'd clearly seen enough criminals to have little patience for Sophie's type. Mrs. Sophie Williams, Judge Hawkins began, you've been found guilty of attempted murder in the first degree, multiple counts of fraud, elder abuse, and theft. Before I pass sentence, do you have anything to say? Sophie stood up slowly. For a moment, I thought she might finally show some remorse. I was wrong. Your Honor, I believe the prosecution has blown this entire situation out of proportion. Yes, I made some poor decisions, but my intentions were never malicious. I was simply trying to solve some financial problems that were affecting my family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even now, facing life in prison, Sophie was trying to minimize what she'd done. I think Mrs. Eleanor Williams has been vindictive in her pursuit of this case, Sophie continued. She's an elderly woman living alone with no real purpose in life. I was actually trying to help her by— That's enough, Judge Hawkins said sharply. Mrs. Williams, what you've just said shows me that you have no remorse whatsoever for your crimes. You attempted to murder an innocent woman for financial gain. You forged legal documents, stole money, and showed complete disregard for human life. Sophie's face went pale. Furthermore, your continued attempts to justify your actions show me that you pose a significant danger to society. You've shown no rehabilitation potential and no understanding of the severity of your crimes. Judge Hawkins looked down at her papers. Mrs. Sophie Williams, I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the attempted murder charge. Additionally, you will serve 25 years for fraud and theft. To run concurrently, you will also pay restitution to all your victims, including Mrs. Eleanor Williams and the clients you stole from at the insurance agency. Sophie collapsed into her chair like her strings had been cut. Furthermore, Judge Hawkins continued, I'm recommending that you be placed in maximum security for the safety of other inmates and staff. Your callous disregard for human life makes you a danger even in prison. As the bailiff led Sophie away in shackles, she turned to look at me one last time. Her face was twisted with hatred and rage. This isn't over, Ellie, she mouthed. I smiled and mouthed back, yes, it is. For the first time in months, I felt completely safe. 6 months after Sophie's sentencing, I was sitting on my back porch enjoying my morning coffee when Michael's car pulled into the driveway. He'd been visiting every Sunday since the trial ended, and we'd slowly rebuilt our relationship. Morning, Mom, he called, carrying a bakery box and a bouquet of flowers. Those flowers are beautiful, honey, but it's not my birthday. Michael grinned. I know. They're congratulations flowers. Congratulations for what? For being the bravest woman I know, and for saving both our lives. I raised an eyebrow. Both our lives? Michael sat down in the chair beside me, setting the flowers on the table. Mom, I've been thinking a lot about what would have happened if Sophie's plan had worked, if you'd drunk that wine and died. That's a dark thought for such a beautiful morning. But it's an important one, because I realized that Sophie wouldn't have stopped with killing you. Once she got away with murder, once she had all that money, what would have stopped her from deciding I was an obstacle too? The thought sent chills down my spine, but I could see the logic in it. Sophie had shown no remorse, no empathy, no limits to what she'd do for money. She married me for my earning potential, Michael continued. But she would have inherited everything from you, making me unnecessary. How long before she decided that a grieving widower with a big life insurance policy was her next target? Don't think about that, honey. It didn't happen. It didn't happen because you were smart enough to give that wine away, because you were brave enough to fight back, because you recorded her confession and called the police. Michael reached over and squeezed my hand. You didn't just save your own life, Mom. You saved mine too. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the birds at my feeder. My life had changed dramatically since that night Sophie brought the wine. I'd installed a security system, changed all my locks, and started taking self-defense classes at the community center. But more importantly, I'd reclaimed my sense of self. I was no longer just a lonely widow existing on the margins of other people's lives. I was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who'd faced down a killer and won. "There's something else," Michael said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "The insurance company finished their investigation. They're paying you compensation for Sophie's fraud." I opened the envelope and stared at the check inside. $50,000. They said it's for the emotional distress and the fraudulent policy changes Sophie made. "It's yours, free and clear." I looked at that check and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: financial security. Not wealth, but enough money to know I'd be okay no matter what happened. "You know what I'm going to do with this?" I asked Michael. "What?" "I'm going to take that cruise I've always wanted to take. The one to Alaska your father and I always talked about but never took." Michael smiled. "That sounds perfect, Mom. And when I come back, I'm going to volunteer at the district attorney's office. They asked if I'd be willing to help other elderly victims of financial abuse. Apparently, my case has become famous in legal circles." "The woman who recorded her own daughter-in-law's murder confession," Michael said with pride. "I love it." As we sat there planning my new future, I realized something important. Sophie had tried to end my life, but instead, she'd given me a reason to start living again. 1 year after Sophie's sentencing, I stood at the podium in the community center addressing a room full of seniors and their families. The local police department had asked me to speak about elder abuse prevention, and the room was packed. "My name is Eleanor Williams," I began, "and I'm here to tell you how my daughter-in-law tried to murder me for insurance money, and how I made sure she'll spend the rest of her life in prison for it." The room was completely silent, everyone hanging on my words. A year ago, I thought I was just a lonely widow living on a fixed income with no real purpose. I let people make decisions for me. I trusted without questioning, and I made myself vulnerable because I didn't think I had any power. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Many of them looked exactly like I had a year ago: tired, resigned, invisible. But here's what I learned. Age doesn't make you powerless. Being alone doesn't make you defenseless. And being trusting doesn't mean you have to be a victim. I told them about the wine, the recording device, the courage it took to call the police. I told them about the importance of asking questions, protecting their financial information, and trusting their instincts when something felt wrong. "The most important thing I can tell you," I concluded, "is that it's never too late to fight back. It's never too late to protect yourself. And it's never too late to start living the life you deserve." The applause was thunderous. Afterward, dozens of people came up to thank me, to share their own stories, to ask for advice. An elderly man named Frank pulled me aside. "Mrs. Williams, my grandson has been pressuring me to change my will. After hearing your story, I think I need to ask some harder questions. Trust your instincts, Frank, and document everything." A woman named Dorothy hugged me with tears in her eyes. "My daughter-in-law has been borrowing money from me for months. I thought I was being helpful, but now I wonder." "You're not responsible for your adult children's financial problems, Dorothy. And borrowing without asking isn't borrowing. It's stealing." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how much my life had changed. The scared, lonely woman who'd given away a bottle of wine was gone. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, and more purposeful than I'd ever been. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Saw the news coverage of your speech online. You looked amazing. Dad would be so proud." He was right. My husband would have been proud of the woman I'd become. But more importantly, I was proud of myself. I pulled into my driveway and noticed a police car parked across the street. Detective Morrison rolled down her window and waved. "Just doing a routine check." "Mrs. Williams, how are you doing?" "I'm doing wonderfully, Detective. How's Sophie adjusting to prison life?" Detective Morrison grinned. "Let's just say she's learning that there are consequences for her actions. Word is that the other inmates aren't too fond of people who try to murder elderly family members." I smiled. "I imagine not." As I walked into my house, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from justice served and a life well lived. Sophie had tried to make me a victim, but instead, she'd made me a survivor. And survivors, I'd learned, were much more dangerous than victims. That night, as I sat on my porch with a glass of wine, one I'd bought and opened myself, I raised a toast to the future. to new adventures, new purposes, and the unshakable knowledge that Eleanor Williams was nobody's victim. The wine tasted like victory. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.